Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the contribution and role that the Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, has played in the Austrian independence. Austria is a small country situated in the European continent. So, how Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has contributed in shaping the Austrian neutrality as far as the military alliances are concerned, that is what we are going to discuss in this video. So, first of all, why we are discussing this particular topic? So, as we know that very recently, few days back, the present Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, visited Austria, and during this time when he was visiting Austria, a statement was released by the Congress leader, especially Jayanagar, where he said that the key role Jawaharlal Nehru has played, that is India's first Prime Minister, it is very important in the emergence of sovereign and neutral Austria. Republic of Austria basically was established in fully only on the October 26, 1955, that means even after the independence of India in 1947, and one person who was critical to this becoming a reality was none other but the man, Jayanagar has said that Mr. Modi loves to hate and defame, that is indirectly talking about Jawaharlal Nehru. So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluded his 2-day visit to Austria on July 10th after visiting Russia before. So, in this context, we try to understand that what has been the history of Austria and how the Pandit Nehru played an important role here. So, first of all, Austria, if you look at this region, after the culmination of World War II in somewhere in 1945, Austria was divided into 4 different regions, and each of these 4 different regions were occupied by 4 different sovereign power. If you look at the map here, the northeastern part of Austria was occupied by Soviet Union, the southern part was occupied by United Kingdom, the western part was occupied by France, and as we can see, the northwestern part was occupied by the United States of America. So, between 1945 to 1955, this is how Austria was divided into 4 different regions. However, Austria wanted to be a sovereign country, and thus the reason behind this, why Austria wanted a sovereign status, obviously because by remaining neutral, neither being in any as we know that after the end of World War II, the entire world was divided into 2 different zones. One was controlled by Soviet Union, other was controlled by capitalist United States of America and allied powers. So, Austria thought that by remaining neutral, it would foster relationship with both countries, Western blocs as well as the Eastern bloc countries, and play a unique role in international diplomacy, and that is why it wanted to become sovereign and independent. Now, because of this region, the desire of Austria was difficult to achieve. It was easier said than done. The reason was because of its unique geography. If you look at the map of Austria in the European continent, we can see that it is situated somewhere in the central part. This is Austria, for example, here. So, to the west of Austria, you can see the country shaded in green represented what we can call as the Western bloc, that was led by United States and UK, and to the east of Austria, the countries here we are seeing were controlled by what we can call as the Eastern bloc or communist bloc, controlled by the Soviet Union. So, it was sitting at a juncture where the Western bloc and Eastern bloc were meeting together. So, due to its central location, it became vulnerable to becoming a Cold War flashpoint largely between Soviet Union and United States. Both the Soviets and the West had intentions of bringing Austria under their own umbrella, and that is why the sovereignty of Austria was something that is difficult to achieve. It is in this context we have to understand the key role Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has played here. So, this is where Nehru enters the picture. It is August 1952. Now, all these points that we are discussing about, if we talk about the reference source for this, it is written in the book that is written by Austrian diplomat Hans Kochler, and he has written a book called as Austria, Neutrality and Non-Alignment. So, in his book, he clearly mentions that in the month of August 1952, the political director of Austria's foreign ministry came to New Delhi. And when he came to New Delhi, his sole purpose was to meet the then Prime Minister Nehru, and after meeting, he was assured by the Prime Minister that India will be ready and India will put its effort to sound out the Soviets on Austria's aspirations and help Austria achieve it. Now, India was among the few countries, this is something that also gets reflected in India's decision in the United Nations General Assembly, and India was one of the few countries that supported Austria's appeal at UNGA at the end of Allied occupation and restoration of the sovereignty. So, this was the first stance that it was taken under the guidance of Prime Minister Nehru. Further, in the month of June 1953, the Austrian Foreign Minister himself, Karl Gruber, he met with Prime Minister Nehru when he went to England to attend the coronation of the Queen Elizabeth II. And it is during this meeting, which was the second meeting between both these leaders, Gruber asked for Nehru's help with the Soviet government in the deadlock negotiations on treaty between Austria and the four allied powers. And also Austria said that if it helps Austria's cause, Prime Minister Nehru can convey this message to the Soviet Union that Austria is ready to offer guarantees against Austrian participation in military alliances. That means Austria can give the guarantee that it will not participate in the alliances. At that time, the military alliances was largely called as Warsaw Pact, that was led by the Soviet Union, and then we have also the Western Bloc alliances. So, Austria said that it will not join either Western or Eastern military alliances, which is an important aspect of its neutrality. So, after this, if we talk about, this was the message that was conveyed by the Prime Minister Nehru also, and if you look at that, how successful was his approach while acting as a mediator between the Soviet Union, the Western powers and Austria, this we can again look from a book published by a well-known English, or we can say British scholar, John Wheeler Bennett Anthony Nichols, and he has written a book by the name of The Political Settlement After the Second World War, The Semblance of Peace. And as per this book, it is clearly stated that Nehru's role as a diplomatic mediator for the cause of Austria introduced an entirely new factor into the Austrian treaty discussions. PM Nehru is without doubt, and this is something that we can also understand from a statement given by the then Foreign Minister of Austria, later on who became Foreign Minister, in the newspaper, the well-known newspaper of Austria, Neues Österreich, that is New Austria. Here he has clearly mentioned that PM Nehru is without a doubt the only personality in international politics whose good offices can be effective in supporting Austria in her efforts toward the realization of the state treaty. So, this is something that is not being done behind the curtain. This is something that is clearly being stated by the diplomats of Austria, that PM Nehru indeed has played a very stellar role in bringing to the conclusion to the Austria's sovereignty. And in the 1976 memoirs, Karl Gruber, as we have discussed, the then Foreign Minister of Austria, wrote about Nehru's role in reaching the treaty in great detail. So, in one way what we can say that obviously the effort of PM Nehru in Australian negotiation resulted into victory, or at least diplomatic victory for Austria. So, what is the culmination of this entire dialogue process? If you look at the final treaty, which is called as the Burgenstock Initiative, after the name of Burgenstock Hotel that you are seeing here at the top of a mountain. So, in 1955, under the Burgenstock Initiative, the foundation or the successful foundation for the conclusion of this treaty was laid, and then Bruno Kreisky, who was then before that he was the officer in the we can say External Affairs Ministry or Foreign Ministry of Austria. Later he became the Foreign Minister of Austria, and even later he became the Prime Minister of Austria. So, in this context, Bruno Kreisky gave a very important statement that in Austrian, or basically in German language, which means thus the name of Nehru will forever be connected with the history of our neutrality. So, from all this discussion we can obviously understand the role that has been played by the Prime Minister Nehru. And obviously, as he was the main mediator of this entire process, after Austria was established as a sovereign nation with political neutrality, in the month of June 1955, Prime Minister Nehru also became the first foreign leader to visit Austria on what we can call as a state visit. And Nehru was the first state visit of foreign leader to newly independent Austria in this context. So, if we talk about how the foreign policy of Austria has changed or whether it has remained same, so obviously the answer is, since the end of Cold War, lot of development has happened in the political space of the European Union, and the evolution of Austrian foreign policy is something that also has happened in consonance with it. For example, while Austria is strictly bound by the neutrality that has been enshrined in its constitution, an incompatibility with the status and an alignment toward the West have been evident, and especially since the 1991 after the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So, when you talk about the neutrality, it has not only been a diplomatic we can say formula for Austria, rather it was so important that neutrality was something that has been included in the constitution, and this is specifically mentioned in article 9A of the Austrian constitution, where it says that it will not join, the country will not join any military alliances and will not allow foreign military bases on its territory. However, as we have discussed, a lot of changes has happened since then, and the first such change was noticed in year 1995, 4 years after the end of Cold War. Austria joined the EU, that is European Union, as well as NATO's Partnership for Peace program. Following this, in the year 2001, especially after the 9/11 attack that happened on United States of America, and to solidify and to build its support against with United States of America, Austrian Parliament then adopted a law authorizing the Defense Ministry of Austria to allow a transit and temporary presence of foreign forces, basically to facilitate the movement of the US-led forces through the European Union territories through or on Austrian territories. This was the first major deviation after that basically contradicts with or is incompatible with the Austrian constitution. Later, the significant development happened in the year 2010 when the Parliament amended the neutrality law of 1955, inserting an article into the constitution, and this article is something that we can say represents the present policy or foreign policy of Austria, which allows for active participation in military operations within the framework of Austria's EU membership. That means, if and when it is required under the EU framework or under the NATO framework, Austria will actively participate in the military operations. So, however, Austria is still one of the 3 countries in the European Union who are still officially neutral, along with Austria. Ireland as well as Malta, which is an island country in the Mediterranean Sea, also has similar law of neutrality in the constitution. So, in conclusion, what we can say, commenting on all the development that has happened, we have talked about before Hans Kochler, who has written about this particular point. He has said a constant erosion of countries' neutrality in favor of Western center real politic is something that has been witnessed, and thus it is not surprising that the Austrian officialdoms, Austrian diplomats, since the end of the Kreisky era, Kreisky, as we have discussed, was the Prime Minister of Austria at that time, have been completely or almost completely silent about the contribution and role, a historical role that Prime Minister Nehru has played as a facilitator and as a mediator in negotiations with the Soviet Union on the conclusion of the state treaty. So, obviously, as the foreign policy of Austria is no longer same as it was during the Cold War or during the Prime Ministership of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, his contribution is something that is not spoken about or something that has been relegated to a historical archives. But overall, what we can say, given the bonhomie of relations that India and Soviet Union enjoyed in the earlier years, especially after the independence, so India under the leadership of Nehru, Prime Minister Nehru, has played a very important role in overall development of Austria's independence and sovereignty. That is all for this particular video. I hope you understood overall the concept that we are trying to discuss here. Thank you very much.